Zack Snyder's Justice League has finally been released after 3 long years of campaigning from fans, the cast, and even the director himself, Zack Snyder, who has finally been able to come back and finish the film that he intended to make. As many of you know, Justice League was an incredibly troubled production. It suffered heavy amounts of studio interference. Zack Snyder, of course, left the project midway through post-production, which then led to Joss Whedon coming in to rewrite and reshoot certain scenes while adding in some of his own stuff. And essentially, Whedon made his own version of the film that was a huge departure from what Zack Snyder originally intended. While I didn't hate Joss Whedon's cut upon seeing it, as I've rewatched it, I've just found it to be so aggressively mediocre that I just never want to watch it. Yet clearly I did watch it again, because obviously I wouldn't have made that comment, and yeah. You guys need to understand, I was very excited to see this film, but I was also keeping my expectations very cautiously low, largely because of how I felt about the Whedon cut of the film, which is probably why I was so surprised by the Snyder cut. Zack Snyder's Justice League is immensely better than Joss Whedon's Justice League. This film is consistently surprising in terms of its quality and how much I just genuinely enjoy this movie. It's not just a great film in that it's better than what we got before, it's actually a great film on its own. I'll be real with you, some of the CG, primarily in the beginning of the film, doesn't look particularly polished. However, considering that's a few shots in a 4-hour film that for the most part looks fecking gorgeous, that might as well be a nitpick. When I say this movie looks gorgeous, I really mean it. Visually, it's stunning, which is in large part due to its visuals. The visuals are amazing, but the cinematography elevates the movie further. It's pretty jaw-dropping in terms of how beautiful it really is sometimes. However, I think the film's 4:3 aspect ratio greatly contributes to this film's visual appeal because it creates a really tall image, because obviously when a movie is filmed on IMAX like the Mission Impossible movies are, you get the black bars at the side, yeah, but you also get this really tall image because you're seeing everything that was captured in the frame. And personally, when I'm watching a movie that is as good looking as Zack Snyder's Justice League, I really want to see everything that's in the frame. And thankfully, Zack Snyder chose to keep the 4:3 aspect ratio, so I am grateful for that. Thank you, Zack Snyder. Watching the movie in this aspect ratio is like looking at an expanded version of a painting that you only really saw a small part of, so now it's like you're seeing the complete picture. That's basically how I would describe watching this movie as a whole. It felt like I was being shown a complete picture, a richer and much deeper version of something that I'd previously only really seen parts of. It's also kinda eye-opening for me because obviously with this essentially being a director's cut, this movie still does retain footage that was used in the last version of the movie, and now that I have seen Zack Snyder's version, I can now 100% confirm that all my favorite scenes from the Joss Whedon cut were Zack Snyder scenes, and this movie is basically filled with Zack Snyder scenes. Even better! The characterization in this film is a major step up from the last film. All the characters in this movie feel more fleshed out and fully developed this time around, particularly Ray Fisher, ooh, nice name, as Cyborg. He has a much larger role this time around, as he shines as one of the most important characters in the entire film. You understand his relationship with his family much more, and you even see what's going on in his head. Ray Fisher's performance as this character is amazing. He portrays Cyborg so well. He's a deeply disturbed and angry character, and Ray Fisher exhibits this flawlessly. He was a major show stealer in this movie. Cyborg's struggle to accept the circumstances of what he's become pigments everything from his initial rejection of the League's offer for him to join them to his acceptance of his powers and his responsibility to use them for good. And I really loved his progression throughout the movie. It was so well handled, so much better than it was in the Whedon cut. Ezra Miller's Flash stole the entire show. He's very excited to join this team, and Ezra Miller conveys that childlike innocence and excitement in the character so wonderfully, but also hilariously. Barry Allen is presented as someone who is clearly more attuned to his powers than he was in the theatrical cut, which is demonstrated in an amazing introduction sequence that was truly jaw-dropping. It's visually stunning, yet very, very funny. The use of the Speed Force in this film was very exciting, and Snyder really doubles down on it in the finale with a truly magnificent sequence, which might actually be my favorite sequence in the entire film. Ben Affleck's Batman is handled in an almost completely completely different way to how he was handled in the theatrical cut. This is a Batman who has been changed by the events of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, and they really show that in how he has to assume a leadership role, contrasting with the isolation that defined him in the past. He serves as the beacon of hope within the team, which again contrasts greatly with who he was in Batman v Superman, but rather than feeling like a completely insane left turn like it did in the Whedon cut, the way it's handled here feels more like a cohesive continuation of his arc in Dawn of Justice. Ben Affleck, as expected, is very strong in this role. He once again proves that his performance as the Caped Crusader is without a doubt one of the best there's ever been, both in Dawn of Justice and this film. Jason Momoa's Aquaman is also given a lot more characterization in this movie. Not only do we get a lot more time spent on his initial reluctance to join the League, but we also get a far more in-depth Aquaman in-depth Anyway, we get a far more in-depth exploration on why he resents the Atlanteans so much and why he resists his Atlantean heritage. A lot of this is used as setup for his arc in his own solo movie, but nonetheless it does give us a far clearer picture on where Aquaman stands on his views of Atlantis, as well as his dynamic with certain members of the Justice League. That, and I'd be lying if I said the dude didn't have some of the coolest sequences in the film. Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman doesn't get too much characterization in this film, but if I'm honest, I'm not too bugged by that purely because we had Patty Jenkins' amazing first Wonder Woman movie. However, the downside of her being the one to know the most about Darkseid and his prior attempt to conquer Earth is that she's often relegated to exposition scenes. However, she still comes across as one of the film's strengths due to her amazing action sequences throughout the film, but also her interactions with the other members of the League. A lot of those scenes are often very heartfelt, funny, or a mixture of the two. She retains her status as one of the most badass characters in the League, as now that she is free from the constraints of a PG-13 rating, my days does she freaking kick ass. Henry Cavill's portrayal of Superman is vastly different from what it was in the Whedon cut. In the Whedon cut, it felt very much like they were trying to recapture the personality and mannerisms of the Christopher Reeve Superman. Henry Cavill's performance as Superman feels very much more in line with how he was portrayed in Man of Steel and Batman v Superman. And not only does his performance here feel more like a continuation of the character we saw in both of those films, but the performance here as a result feels way more genuine and less phoned in. Like in the Whedon cut, Superman's role is limited by design, but unlike the Whedon cut, Superman's resurrection has more of a lead up, so it plays a lot better, and there is a scene at the Kent family farm where Henry Cavill really shines in his performance. There is also a scene heavily involving Superman that honestly gave me goosebumps. It was so awesome. I think the character that benefits the least from the extra runtime is definitely Amy Adams as Lois Lane. I still think this series is trying to figure out how to properly utilize her in these films, and while she is integral to the narrative of this film and Amy Adams excels in a performance side of things, it just feels like they didn't know how to properly utilize her, so she largely just appears sporadically throughout the film to mourn the loss of Clark Kent and not much else. So let's talk about Stefan Wolfe. He is a much more interesting character in this one. He is an outcast, trying to make good on his mistakes and past failures so that he can win the approval of his superiors. Yeah, I'd be lying if I said it was anything groundbreakingly engaging or original for that matter, but at least he actually starts off with some genuine motivations, and his eventual fate in this movie is a million times cooler than what happened in the Whedon cut. That, and he looks amazing. His design is really unique and way more imaginative than his theatrical design, and the CGI used to bring him to life looks a million times less obvious, with a pretty incredible attention to detail. Then there's Darkseid. I'm just gonna fair warn you, if you've seen the trailers for this movie, you will know that Darkseid does feature quite prominently in those trailers. Do not expect much from Darkseid. He is in this movie for at least 4 minutes. Having said that, when he's on screen, oh my days, he is awesome. He looks incredible, ripped straight out of the pages of a comic book, and magnificently imposing. Whenever this guy shows up, it is goosebumps inducing. Even though he is in this film very little, his presence looms over the entire movie in a very chilling way. The film's comedy is significantly toned down from Whedon's cut of the film, but toned up from Snyder's 2 previous films in this universe, and most of the comedy is surprisingly pretty funny. Although most of my favorite jokes in the film came from The Flash, Ezra Miller's comedic timing is just so good. The comedy feels like it's just on the right level. It never feels like overkill, as many of the more cringy jokes from Whedon's cut of the film did, such as Flash falling on top of Wonder Woman, thank God that's gone, and Batman's awkward humor has also completely vanished. Yay! This is a very long film. There is absolutely no denying that. It's the first movie I've ever watched that's literally 4 hours long, yet it never felt like it dragged, and that's largely because I was just enjoying this movie all the way through. To be honest, it felt about as long as Avengers Infinity War did, but it was also because I was actually interested in what was going on with these characters and how this story was progressing. Yes, there are things that are in this movie with the expressed purpose of setting up a sequel and other movies that were meant to take place in this franchise, and I can really see how that would be infuriating for some, because for one, we don't know if we'll ever get a sequel, and two, a lot of the movies that this movie was trying to set up have been cancelled. I wasn't particularly bothered by this because the setup for these other projects doesn't overshadow the film's narrative. It never forgets to be a film first and setup second, despite what it's setting up. By the end of the film, I still felt like I had seen a beginning, middle, and end that was cohesive and felt like its own story, even though what this film was setting up sounds incredible and I really wish it could have happened. With that said, there are a couple of scenes that do feel kind of tacked on. Without spoiling anything, there is a character who makes a surprise appearance in this film, and while it was honestly pretty amazing seeing this particular character, their appearance contributes almost nothing to the film. There's also a newly shot nightmare sequence, and while the scene itself is very cool and it gives us a look at what the future could have held for these characters, it doesn't really feel necessary, especially considering it happens immediately after a scene that sums up the characters' arcs in the film. That said, the interaction between Batman and the Joker does not disappoint. Their gruesome history looms pretty large over the intensity of their exchange, and Affleck and Leto really give it their all. I'm just gonna say it actually kind of restored my faith in Jared Leto's Joker. He is so good in this scene, and it made me wonder what his performance in Suicide Squad was originally going to be. The film's action is highly enjoyable and very exhilarating. Snyder has always been great at conveying the physicality of the characters and utilizing that in the action, and trust me, he really doesn't disappoint in that department. The action is more visceral thanks to the departure from the PG-13 rating, and each hero gets multiple moments to shine. The battle sequence on Themyscira alone is amazing in this movie, and much better than it was in the Whedon cut, and even then I really liked it. It felt like a really brutal baton race as they were passing the mother box between each other. The whole sequence felt like a movie in of itself, which is why I'm not surprised that we very nearly got this film as a miniseries. I mean, the movie is literally split into 7 chapters, so it kind of felt like 7 parts of a really, really good miniseries. On the whole, I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. It is a vastly superior version of a film that we only really saw bits of in 2017. Not only that, it's a great movie on its own. It's not a flawless movie by any stretch, but I was very pleasantly surprised by it. I don't know if we'll ever see a continuation of this story, but if it ever does happen, I would be pretty excited to see it. It's really inspirational that despite everything that happened, Zack Snyder was able to come back and finish his film. That is just so cool to me. So with all that said, Zack Snyder's Justice League gets a very freaking well-deserved 9 out of 10. So those are my thoughts on Zack Snyder's Justice League. I do hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much as always for watching, but before I go, I would just like to ask you guys, what did you think of Zack Snyder's Justice League? Did you think it was good? Did you think it was bad? Did you think it was somewhere in the middle? Did you think it was better or worse than the Whedon cut? Please leave your thoughts down below in the comments, and I will indeed see you guys in the next one. Until next time, live long and prosper, and may the Force be with you, always.